2017. Tonight's webinar is really about the trust that your children have for you, or in the case of any relationship, the trust that people have for you, and what you can do to engender that and encourage that. I think we spend so much of our time and energy thinking about how much we trust other people, particularly in the child relationship. It's the parent thinking about how much they can trust the child. But do we spend enough time asking ourselves, are we trustworthy? Are we safe? So this is a clinical idea, a clinical principle that we call containing or containment. And it is the ability of the person to welcome you, to hold you in their mind. Or if we're talking about our children, it's our ability to hold our children in our mind with patience, curiosity, non-judgment, compassion. It's that way. And what do we need to do to develop that? And what impact does it have on our children and on the relationship? You can think of this webinar as a webinar on advanced listening. If you haven't watched the communication webinar, I urge you to go back to it because that's kind of where we start. And this is a more robust version, or a more robust addition to that webinar. So I'm going to read some slides. I'm going to read the principles, the concepts, the quotes, and then I'm going to expand on them. And like always, you can always request the slides. If you go to the parent portal, they're right there. So let's talk about clinical background. This comes from analytic theories. It's influenced by Melanie Klein's conceptualization of the early state of mental function. Bion hypothesized that the infant mental capacity essentially consisted of a sense of relatedness between something innate or internal and something foreign. So this is the ability. That's a very technical paragraph. It's the ability of a parent to provide a place for the child where they feel welcomed, right? That's the idea. The hard part about our children, the children that end up at Evoke, is that they make it difficult at times. They require greater capacity. They do things that scare us. They do things that upset us. And that's why I talk about this all the time. We have to find a way to develop greater resources. That's why we have to go to therapy to do this work. That's why we have to go to 12-step meetings. That's why we have to figure out how to work a program. Where can we get more resources? What can we read? I just finished an intensive this weekend, and I was sharing this with one of the participants at the end. They were expressing a great deal of optimism about their life, about their certain situation. And I was glad to hear that. I congratulated them on the work they had done. And then I thought about it, and I paused for a moment. I said, remember, that comes because of your work. It doesn't come because circumstances have changed. It comes because of your work. Because in a week or two or a month from now, you're going to have a moment of feeling overwhelmed again. You're going to have a moment of despair. And the thing that keeps you in that optimistic, hopeful place is to do your work. I can't express that more clearly to all of you. The work is what makes you feel better. The work is what changes your perspective, changes your eyes, changes your ears. And that change has a wonderful impact on the child. When a child feels welcomed, then they feel safe and okay. When a parent responds with anger, frustration, anxiety, and gives that to the child, gives that to them to hold, that's not providing a healthy container, a healthy environment. Except for the only option that the child is left with is the idea that something must be wrong with me. If I cause somebody anxiety, something must be wrong with me. And I'll say it to you this way. If I come to somebody and I share something about myself with them and I feel their anxiety, their upsetness, my immediate shift is, oh, I have to take care of them. This is not a place where I can be taken care of and responded to. That's why therapists can be so helpful with your children, because we're more detached. We don't freak out as much. That's why a therapist helps me with my children. That's why my children, when they go to therapy, are helped in a way that oftentimes I am not able, because it's difficult for myself to do that. It's difficult for all of us. Cutoff for enmeshment, recognizing errors and styles. The first example is when the container reacts to intrusions into it by becoming rigid and unresponsive. In this case, the contained cannot be accepted and understood in its own right. An example might be a mother who responds to an infant's distress but responds with exasperation rather than with a soothing attitude, or a therapist who responds to a patient's rage with defensive measures rather than acceptance and genuine curiosity to better comprehend the response. It reminds me of the story that I've told before about a young client that I had, young female, 16-year-old, who essentially asked her parents if she could go on to further treatment, but they wanted to take her home. And at one point, she was describing her father. And in this description, she was describing him as this kind of solid rock, unable to be empathic, to be sensitive, to be flexible. And she talked about him stomping out of the room and walking away with lots of judgment. And I said to her, he sounds really fragile. And she said, in a confused response, Brad, I can't explain to you more clearly how differently I see my father. He doesn't seem fragile at all. He seems like a rock. And I said, but that is fragile. It doesn't look fragile. The exterior is very gruff, very, very, very tough, but it's a lack of capacity to stay present. Interesting story is the father ended up coming to graduation, and when the daughter was sharing some concerns, some anxiety about relapse, the father, through an interaction, eventually left before I could even come and visit him. I never saw him. He left the transition area, the transition camp that we had at that day. And the girl struggled significantly after the program. So this is the one style. Bayan characterized the parent described above in the following way. From the infant's point of view, she should have taken into her and thus experienced the child's fear, the child's distress. It was the fear that the child could not contain for himself. An understanding parent is able to experience the feeling of dread that this baby was striving to deal with by projective identification and yet retain a balanced outlook. So it's that idea that children look to us, especially in early childhood, as a mirror that tells them about them. And if I cause dread, if I cause frustration and anger, the reflection back is I'm bad. So that's why anxiety, that's why fear, that's why anger can have such a negative impact on our children, because that's how they experience themselves. That's how they first see themselves, is through the eyes of the caregiver, through the eyes of the parent. And we unconsciously, I think, fall into that pattern, right? We play into that. We say to our children, you're making me mad. You're making me anxious. Stop these behaviors. Stop doing this so that mommy and daddy aren't upset, right? We actually fortify that idea by telling our children that our distress is caused by them and they need to change. And so they develop this not necessarily a whole sense of themselves. And if not a whole sense of themselves, at least a distorted sense of themselves. And what they have to do then is they have to hide part of themselves. They have to repress part of themselves, sacrifice part of themselves, so that mom and dad feel soothed and comforted. And that's what Alice Miller's talking about in her entire book, The Drama of the Gifted Child. The giftedness of the child is their capacity to see what a parent needs and to give it to them at their own expense. And in old psychology models, they call this consumption, being consumed by the parent, right? Being eaten for nourishment, if you will. It comes from some Greek stories, some Greek goddesses. The second example, then, is when the contained has a resonant impact on the container. And the response of the container is to empathically accept and contain the contained and subtly modify it by use of greater resources of the container. In other words, metabolize the contained. In this situation, the contained is more or less fully felt and understood by the container. At the same time, the container can rely upon additional resources to feed back to the contained a wider sense of the contained experience. Along with this is the experience for the contained, that the container can adequately accept and manage what has been offered and contained. That's an incredibly complex couple of paragraphs. But what they're saying essentially is, if I can take you in, if I can see you, if I can hear you, if I can tolerate you, in that experience, I can also impact you in such a way, reflect back to you in such a way, a positive sense. And that change, right? That change has a wonderful impact on you. it goes to this idea when I talk to parents, your goal is not to not be afraid of scary things. Your goal is not to be angry. I had a parent ask me this today, this question. What do I do with this? Because my son is doing things that terrify me. The drug use, the acting out is scary. So what do I do? And I say, you let it inform you. I'm worried about your son, right? I'm worried about your son, and that's going to impact my recommendations. But I'm not so fused with that, not so overwhelmed by that fear, that I become reactive and that I give it back to your son over and over and over again. I give it back to him by talking about it, by sharing it, by disowning it in myself and putting it on him. And that's why, again, good example where a therapist can be helpful. A therapist can provide what a parent can't in this situation. And I think this is a very generous gift to parents because it doesn't make you bad, right? When we talk about therapeutic placement, when we talk about children not living at home, we're not saying you're pathogenic or crazy. We're saying you're overwhelmed. We're saying your resources are taxed, and children like this can do this, and they might need more help that you can't give. Same with me and my children. Other people help them in ways that I can't. And Alice Miller said that also. She said, a mother, she always talked in terms of mothers, a mother can give her child what her child needs, even if that mother is ill-equipped, if only that mother allows the child to get it from other people. So sometimes that's what all this support that you're getting, that's what all this support that your child is getting is about. And then hopefully we can help them, and by doing this work this way, by you owning your stuff. This really is about parents saying, I have issues that I have to work on, that are a part of this dance, right? This webinar, maybe as much as anyone, make it clear what your work is. My work is to develop capacity. My work is to get big enough to be able to hold you. And because you have a specific set of problems, I have to work more than average. Maybe with your brother or your sister, I didn't have to work that much. It came easier to me because they weren't presenting with Asperger's. They weren't presenting with depression, anxiety. They weren't presenting with cutting and hypersexuality and drug abuse. So I have to do something to get bigger. And then in all versions of therapy, treating all those things I just mentioned, you learn to listen. You get less scared. And that's you having more capacity and developing a greater ability to contain or to hold somebody with compassion. We don't even realize how much we ask people to hold us. When you walk into a room with feelings and thoughts, you're asking and hoping unconsciously that the people in that room can hold you, that they can be okay with you. When they start giving advice, right? When they start telling you how crazy you are, that's when you know they're not safe. This is not a safe place for me. Of course, all parents and therapists, in other words, containers, fail at times, some more, some less. But some parents and therapists cannot maintain a balance of mind. And failing, the parent becomes a container that is either too rigid or too fragile. A rigid mother takes in, as Bion describes, and utters formal responses without a real understanding of the infant's distress. A fragile parent will, when confronted by her distressed baby, go to pieces and panic. In either case, the infant receives back its own projection with an implicit message that, after all, as it feared, its state of mind is not tolerable. It suffers, in Bion's terms, a nameless dread, a state of mind that is not thinkable. I mean, how many of us can relate to that with our struggling children? We absolutely can see that and can see that struggle. So the idea is that when we fall apart, when we tell our children, I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't work, my stomach is in knots, I have a headache, I'm a nervous wreck. You know, when we say that, when we offer that, when we live that, when we project that out to them, that's the example of the fragile container, the fragile parent. So what do we have to do? We have to go somewhere, somehow, and become fortified. We have to develop a more whole, a more integrated sense of ourselves so that we can be present in the face of that storm that is our child and their behaviors and hold them. Hold them in our minds. I talk about in my book. It's not what you say to your child that becomes their inner voice. It's what you think about your child. And what you think about your child is what they will come to think about themselves. And if they are a problem, right, if that's what they are, then that's how they will come to think about themselves. And even when the significant symptomology goes away, right, the inner voice that we're all dealing with at times, the self-doubt, the insecurity that all of us on this webinar struggle with, is that voice, is that's where that comes from, is the container around us. It starts off with parents, moves eventually to teachers and peers, and then others. Those things tell us psychologically about us and about who we are. Talking about countertransference, which is a clinical term. Again, I'm kind of making this, explaining this complex clinical ideologies. I'm explaining these to you and then borrowing them in parenting. Countertransference is the way that I feel towards and about my client. And it's not something like they had red hair like my mother, and so that reminds me of my mother, but the feeling that I have around them reminds me of the feeling that I had around others. And I go into a certain mode, a certain reaction, a certain way of thinking and treating them. Be honest, real, feeling, and responsible for your feelings. Ownership. Don't not feel, but own them. We published a blog just yesterday on the Evoke website of mine about how a parent's limitations impact the child. And the real danger is not the limitation, because we all have it. It's the disowned limitation. So I am not telling you not to hurt. I'm not telling you not to feel afraid. I'm telling you, you must manage that somewhere else but with your child. It's not good for them. It's not helpful for them to have you manage it in the relationship and to be handing it over, talking about it, discussing it, and suggesting to them that they need to be different so that you are okay. They say this in Al-Anon, your serenity is your responsibility. And what your child thinks about you in this one way is none of your business. Another way of thinking about all this is you take on all these thoughts and feelings, but you've got to have a really well-developed adult filter, is what I call a parent-adult filter, right? You take in your worry and concern about your child, you put that into the filter to the higher level brain functioning, and then you make informed decisions about it. Not reactive, not controlling, but decisions that are informed by your concern, mixed with your awareness. In terms of countertransference, Hyman wrote, the aim of the analyst's own analysis is not to turn him into a mechanical brain which can produce interpretations on the basis of purely intellectual procedure, but to enable him to sustain his feelings as opposed to discharging them like the patient. You know, some of you know what psychoanalysis is. It's kind of that old Freudian term, you know, on the couch 3 days a week. But what people sometimes don't understand about that, what they don't understand about that is how much compassion, how much capacity does that job require? Can you imagine listening to somebody for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 2-3 times a week, talk about their issues, their problems? Do you know how much capacity that requires? It might seem cold and distant to some people because they're not reacting, but that's because, like I read on the previous slide, they're metabolizing this. They're digesting it. They're remaining curious. They're priding themselves on what they don't know, the conclusions they haven't arrived at yet. And to be around somebody like that is marvelous. The opposite is somebody who has all the answers, is trying to control you, gets frustrated with you when you don't do what they say, gives you advice, tries to fix it. Right? That's the opposite. This process takes a lot more compassion, a lot more capacity. So it's about ownership. Countertransference is defined as the redirection of a psychotherapist's feelings towards a client, or more generally, as the therapist's emotional entanglement with the client, right? It's not something we avoid or ignore or feel ashamed of. It's something that we see, experience, and then pay attention to. We look at it, and it tells us something about the client. A new belief had come into being that countertransference can be of such enormous clinical usefulness. You have to distinguish between what your reactions to the patient are telling you about his psychology and what they are merely expressing about your own issues. You know, I love this quote from Jamie Gill where she says, a therapist, and I think this applies to parenting too, a therapist doesn't need to be the paragon of health. Indeed, no therapist is, no parent is. But what a therapist needs to be, and what is helpful for a parent to be, is they need to know what the ideal is. They need to be able to imagine the ideal. And then they need to be able to recognize how far away they are from that ideal. And, you know, when I was talking to a client not too long ago, and I was describing an ideal, and he said to me, "You're amazing. You must be so courageous." And I said, no, I don't do this all the time. But I know what it looks like. And I know how far away I am. And I'm trying to show you what it looks like so you can see how far away you are. And then that space in between, right? There's the ideal here, and there's what you do or did here. And that space in between is the work. What stops me from being compassionate? What stops me from being curious and patient and open and humble and loving? What stops me from that? That is my work. That is why I go to therapy. That is what I look at. That is the question that I ask myself every day. Countertransference errors. Acting on a feeling from your child as if it's one's own instead of trying to understand the feeling is a countertransference error, and we all make it. Right? It's probably one of the most common things that I see. Parents can't distinguish between themselves and other. And they start reacting out of their need and not their child's need. Looking at parenting as a journey and not getting it right, or getting in trouble when you are coached. Sometimes when I'm talking to parents, private practice, when I'm talking to parents at Evoke, when I'm talking to parents at the intensive, they focus on getting it right. Like, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to get in trouble. Because of shame, right? Because that's what their background told them. It was about getting it right. Instead of showing up, being very human, and then learning what you don't know. That's a very different way of involvement, a very different way of being in this world. Perhaps the extreme development of the new view is what is known as the countertransference self-disclosure. The analyst reveals to the patient what he or she is feeling, so as to highlight the difference between the analyst's experience and that of the patient. In one opinion, this implies an entirely different view of what communication between patient and analyst is about. The classical late 20th century view being that it is not a matter of confessing to the countertransference, but recognizing it and integrating it into the interpretation. And so you use it. We can share our feelings with somebody, right? We can share them. We don't want to hand them over to repetitively. We don't want to suggest it's their responsibility, but we can bring it out. I'm feeling scared right now. I'm feeling angry or frustrated. And then we can pull it apart. We can see what is ours and take it back in. We can allow it to inform the other if they so choose to allow it. That's what this idea, this modern idea about. If the therapist does not get emotionally involved sooner or later in the manner that he had not intended, therapy will not proceed to a successful conclusion. You know, really what this is about, you know, when you're feeling hopeless, when you're feeling despairing in relationship to your child, in a lot of ways, that's exactly what they're feeling. That's what this awareness can bring. You know, your child wants to make you feel, this is all unconscious, wants to make you feel like them. They want to make you feel as desperate and as lost and as stuck as they do, so that you can finally listen to them. None of this is conscious. None of this could they state as an awareness. But that can be a way that this kind of work can help you. When you get a letter, when you have a conversation, pay attention to your feelings. And learning to interpret your feelings is the work. Like right now, I'm feeling anxious right now. And what does that come from? That comes from my desire to control. Or I'm feeling sad or guilty or ashamed. And learning to interpret it is part of the work. Basic tenets of containing. Don't be the expert. It's so, this is one of those ones I could highlight on its own slide. Show up not knowing. That will let your children know that they're not alone. Right? It's as important to show up not knowing. Don't give examples where you figured it all out. Give examples, it's to say, more often to say, I know what that's like. I struggle with that too. And you don't have to add that the ending, which is, I struggle with it and this is how I fixed it. I mean, that's implied. It's just, I fall into that trap too. I struggle with peer pressure too. I struggle with setting goals and going back. I struggle with regression. I struggle with knowing in my head the right thing to do and not being able to do it. So I know what that feels like. And you can hear that. What does that sound like to a child? It sounds like compassion, understanding. They're not broken in some kind of different way. That's what that sounds like. Learn how to feel better. Learn to find ways to have a sense of serenity. It's like I always say, that old adage, you're only as happy as your least successful child. It doesn't work for anybody. And your child can't carry that responsibility around on them. And we can all easily imagine examples in our lives, and maybe even our child's lives, if we're open and creative enough, we can understand examples where children make decisions that upset the parent, and it's not wrong. It's the right thing to do. Watch for cutoff or enmeshment. Understand your style and understand the similarity between those two. Both are a lack of capacity. Both are a lack of ability to see other as other. Watch for controlling triggers. Even as a therapist, I think about this all the time. If I get really energetic about fixing you, I'm a horrible therapist. If I get really energetic about fixing my child, I become less effective, less helpful in the process. Watch for things like trying to fix, alleviate, solve, dismiss, discount, or change. But you know what happens to parents so often? They get reinforced because they do solve problems. But solving problems doesn't solve the real core issue of what this therapeutic work is about. This real therapeutic work is about the child becoming a whole self and solving a problem for them, and the relief that they get and the relief that you get. You have all the evidence in the world that you came to the rescue and it worked, and they might even thank you for it or be happy because of it in the short term. They don't learn how to become a whole self. That's why rescuing, that's why fixing doesn't work. Because the work in therapy is not solving problems. The work in therapy is developing a self. Tolerate their rotten self and still hold boundaries. Don't come at it at a place of anger. I would talk about this. The solution isn't to send your child to evoke. The solution isn't where you go after evoke. The solution is finding your truth and having it come out of that place. What we know at evoke is that this process that we've created, this process that we've set up, sets you up to become a part of the solution, right? You send your child here with the idea that this is going to save them. I'm overwhelmed. They need some protection from themselves, right? All of those things are true. They're stuck. I'm overwhelmed. I can't seem to help them. And that's the right reason to come here. And then once you get here, we give you a lifetime membership in webinars, all the support and assignments that we can, so that you develop this idea, so that it lasts forever, so it sustains itself and you become the expert in your own life. What are the skills involved? Listening, clearing your mind of judgments, conclusions. You don't know your child's truth. You don't. If everything goes well, they're going to move just beyond the horizon of what you can see. They're going to be bigger than you. Unfortunately, that path is messy as can be. It involves jail time sometimes. It involves horrible decisions. But the more that you can be a part of that process in this way that we're describing tonight, it'll be both a joy to you and a huge asset and resource to them. So don't think you need to know their truth, because you can't possibly know it. Yours is hard enough to find and keep hold of. Clear your mind. Embrace not knowing. Be reflective. right? Spend so much time on hearing other people. And sometimes when you get really good at this, you hear them, you hear what they don't say, right? You understand, and that's really what part of therapy is. Like, I listen to you, I hear it, and I hear something you haven't heard yet. And then I reflect it back to you, say, what about this? Does it sound like this? This is what it sounds like to my ears. Does that fit for you? Right? I'm helping you to find your story. So reflect, understand, and empathize as much as possible. Not getting your child in a chronic way is a problem. That's a you problem. I don't know why she does this. I don't know why he does this. I mean, I have empathy for that, but the response is, it's your job. It's your job to get them. It's your job to find their story. And in their story, you'll find two things. You'll find how everything they're doing makes sense, number one, and you'll find in that story that some things are being asked of you. Can you do it? And you get to decide if you can do it. Understanding and empathizing. Don't respond to your reactions. Defensive, justifying, explaining, interpreting, teaching, clarifying, encouraging even. Encouraging is on that list, right? Don't necessarily respond to the knee-jerk impulse. Begin to question that. Begin to understand, to pick it apart. Begin to slow it down. Begin to take it out of the bottom part of the brain, the fight or flight part of the brain, and up into the prefrontal cortex where you're thinking, where things are moving a lot slower. Things are a lot deliberate. Things are taking more variables into consideration. Ask for what they need, then decide if you want to do it. Right? It's one of the 8 tools for communication in that webinar, in that blog story. What do you need from me? What would you like from me? And ask if they want a reaction, but I got to tell you, I spent much of my time with my wife and with my children trying not to give them a reaction, even if they ask for it. Because I don't think they need it right then. I don't think, my goal is to be clearing my mind. My goal is to be having understanding, non-judgment, not to explain or analyze it away. And I have a tool set where I can do that, right? I'm a therapist, I'm trained. I could turn it back on them and show them how every feeling, thought that they have is based in some kind of pathology if I wanted to, especially when it's uncomfortable for me. But understanding it, counterintuitively, of course, understanding it is what creates the context, the container for healing. It's like I said to many of you before, when we have this joke I talk about all the time in my lectures, in my talks at the intensive, when my therapist said, if you were in love with a chicken, I would assume that you have a good reason. I'd be curious as to understand why. That's a healthy container. That's capacity. That's more than my mother could have, for example, done, or I could have done if my child came home and said I was in love with the chicken. And just be really wary of that reaction. Feel what you feel and own it. It's yours. Read the blog on parental limitations. That's what it talks about. And then learn to feel what they're feeling. Learn to understand. Learn to hear it. Learn to develop the hearing, the sight. And learn to understand what's going on for them. What gets in the way of parental listening? Our empathic misery, right? That's what gets in the way. Making it about you, feeling the need to respond with anything other than listening. And sometimes you just can't. So you've got to take a time out, literally or figuratively. You've got to take some space. You've got to go somewhere. When you're getting triggered to do anything but the things we're talking about tonight, there's some work for you to do. And developing a program for you that's yours, that you own, that you like, that you're comfortable with. Developing a program that works for you is your job. Over-identifying, right? That's the most severe form of abandonment, as I always say, as it says in the book. Over-identifying means that the child is altogether lost in the equation. They, in essence, don't exist because I'm just seeing myself. Low pain tolerance, that's the empathic misery that I was talking about. Resolving your anxieties because what you're saying is, you need to be here so I feel okay. Not so that you're okay. This isn't even about you, so that I feel okay. You are wired and socialized to be the protector, the fixer. So it makes sense. And with younger children, you're more involved in that. And as they get older, you create more space. But you know how hard it's. I always say that the worst sound in the world, my least favorite sound in the entire world, is the sound of my child crying. Pain in my child's voice is the most uncomfortable. And it extends to other children and other people some, but it starts off with my child. And it tells me that I need to do something and that something is wrong. And I, again, I'm speaking symbolically, I'm speaking psychologically. My child crying is interpreted by me as I'm a bad dad. Because if I was a good dad, they wouldn't be crying. They would feel okay, they would feel soothed. But you see, all of that's about me. None of that speaks to what they need in adolescence, for example. In co-therapy, you have two therapists in a session because when one person is getting wrapped up into it, the other person can keep their head above water. Right? You can offer that to each other. And I think the same is true when you invite a therapist into the parenting, temporarily into the parenting executive system. Or when two parents can be resources for each other, support for each other, patient with each other, loving with each other in this process. And it's just another comment. It's easier to be a therapist than a parent. By far. By far. Not even close. Most jobs are easier than being a parent. That's why it can be so tempting for those of us who work outside of the home to spend more and more time, because you ask for a pencil at work, they give you a pencil. You ask for a pencil at home, and they give you a dish towel. It just doesn't work the same. It's not as rewarding. Well, what does it accomplish? It accomplishes healthy attachment. It accomplishes a sense in the child that they are okay. It accomplishes safety, right? It addresses how much they trust you. Children will lie to you to try to get away with something, but they also lie to you to protect themselves from judgment and protect themselves from your anxiety and anger. I was talking to a parent recently about his child coming to the program, and he said he was inclined to write an impact letter that was loving, that really wasn't about him. It was about his hopes and concerns for his child that he sees, and kind of giving that to his child. And I said that's ideal. The impact letter isn't about I am so upset and angry and hurt. The impact letter is I am those things, but the key here is that what you're doing to protect yourself is hurting others, but it's hurting you the most. It's hurting you. Your armor, like it says in the Knight in Rusty Armor on several occasions, your armor is hurting you much more than it's hurting me. That's the ideal. Validation and self-discovery for the other, right? You can find yourself when somebody finds you. It's very difficult to find oneself until we are found by someone else. The root of the self is almost always found through somebody else. Right? That's from the book. That's that idea. It's a concept from an attachment theorist named Jessica Benjamin. Sustained change comes from a place of self-understanding and love rather than from a place of guilt and shame. Guilt and shame have great short-term impact on behavior. They do not help an individual develop a healthy, robust sense of themselves, resilience, a sense of okayness. Repairing is what we do. You know, we're trying to give them reparative experiences at Evoke. It's very controlled. It's very small. It's a small little universe that looks like the big universe. And we learn to listen to everything. We learn to be non-anxious. You learn that in your letters. Of course, it takes a lot of time to do this. It doesn't happen with an intervention. It's not just an aha moment. It is an experience sustained over time. And lastly, you know, the more you can apologize. And I know parents are sometimes afraid that if they apologize too much, their child is going to blame them. On the contrary, if you apologize as a gift that asks for nothing in return, you're okay. You can't fail at it. You're just being accountable. And you're recognizing and you're creating safety. You're recognizing that I have some participation in this issue. I have some issues. And they've left dents in you. I remember one time when I really blew it with my adult daughter. She was sharing some things that she was upset, and I was a horrible container. And of course, my defenses are really sophisticated, and so I was really proud of my defense. I was justifying it as I was doing it. And then I saw the tears in her eyes, and I realized I'm being abusive. And I asked for a second chance, and I made a mistake, and then she talked to me, and it went okay, and I felt horrible. And I went to my therapist, and my therapist said, it's probably better that you screwed up and apologized than you got it right the first time. Because sometimes you're overwhelming for your children. You're always getting it right. You know everything. And they don't need a dad who knows everything. They need a dad who's human, who can own his stuff, who makes mistakes and has to apologize. You're not too old. It's not too late. I don't care how old your child is. It's never too late. My mother has given me some wonderful gifts in her 70s around these issues. Fantastic. All right, any questions that have come in, I'm happy to address. I'll go to some slides, and then if there are any questions. We want all parents to go to 6 12-step support groups: Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Nar-Anon, Alateen is for teenagers. Remember, these are places you go to complain, to fret, to worry, and those people can hold on to you. Right? You get to discharge that. You get to be in that place. So go to 6 meetings. The small brush strokes will be different amongst all of you. But the core structure, the core basics, the core issues about relating to another human being will be the same. You can also go to NAMI.org. That's a nice resource for in your area, for classes, for other things. Follow us on social media. All of our webinars are being switched over to podcasts. You can listen to them on all your devices, recorded even if you don't have internet connection, if you download them. Go to the podcast app on iPhone and iOS devices, or go to the SoundCloud app on Android devices. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. These are sometimes for inspirational quotes and thoughts and pictures, but they're also for announcements. So Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at Evoke Therapy Programs. You can go to Amazon. You can go to the Second Nature Alumni Foundation page on Facebook to find out how to get involved in helping with people who can't afford therapy, or you can go to our blog. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon. You can also go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page on Amazon, and you can get my book and other books, and a part of the proceeds goes to the charity to help people who can't afford therapy. Be in New York next, well, that's Tuesday, right? Tuesday's the 28th. Be in New York on the 28th. Los Angeles at the end of March. It's that 4 to 5 p.m. potluck, followed by a 5 to 7 o'clock meeting, and then the Bay Area the following day. It'll be in a new location, the Muirwood IOP. Also, we have workshops that we want all current families to go to if they possibly can, and you might be able to coordinate that with a field visit if it's the right place and the right time. Talk to your therapist about that. If you want to do deeper work, actually the Finding You in March is almost full. We might have to start to go to 2 per month, but if you want to go to the Finding You, that intensive thing that I run that lasts 4 days where we go really deep into your work and make a connection to your present day. If you want that, get on that soon, because it's almost full. Then we have one in April, at the end of April, and then we're doing one out in the wilderness that can be for families or individuals at the end of May. Pursuits are high adventure trips that you can go on as a family. You can kind of mix and match too. Pursuits trips, they're international all over. You can choose your activities, and you can also add therapy to it. If you want to do it for your children, you don't want to just do intensive work, but you want to have a combination. Sometimes that's more palatable for children, is some fun, some fly fishing, some mountain biking, some river rafting, some climbing or rappelling, and then some therapeutic process. So it's kind of sober fun, therapy light, adventure therapy. All right. First question from a parent. My daughter is in an RTC, and it is hard to be the container in the best way on home visits. So many triggers that sometimes we all falter. Any suggestions? I can see each visit is better, but I find myself anxious as the visits approach. As her mother, I do want it to go well, so we can all keep moving forward. Thanks. You know, First of all, you're not unique. I mean, that's it's normal. And there's so, I mean, you've invested so much money, so much time, so much energy into all this. It makes sense why you're just hoping that things are fixed, that it goes well. That's normal. All of that is normal. However, doesn't help, as you know. So you've got to embrace the mess. Right? When my son was leaving Wilderness, he did go to aftercare. But as they were talking to me about him not being ready, the consultant and the wilderness therapist, he's not ready, he needs more. And I said, by the time when I took him home, I said, I'm okay with the mess. I want the mess. I want to work through it. I want to work with him. And I'm going to value the mistakes as much as, and I got better at, I'm better now than I was then at valuing mistakes. Right? That's how children come to know themselves, is through mistakes. Now, if it gets to the point where it's unsafe and intolerable, then I get to make that decision again. At one point, my son was a week or two away from me sending him again. I didn't tell him that because I was around him. I was trying to be as calm as possible, but I was scared. And I was talking to friends and colleagues and mentors. And like I said, I was about to send him away again. But I did something different with him. And he started talking to me more. And he started opening up. And eventually he figured it out. And that's 7 years ago, 8 years ago. It's been fantastic ever since. So get support, get work, value the struggle. Don't just value the successes. And by valuing the struggles, you're going to show up during the mistakes, during the missteps. You're going to show up in a different way that feels different, that is containing. So that's the idea. Keep watching webinars, read books that help you, go to therapy, go to meetings, and learn that sometimes out of disaster. I was talking to a mother today about all the potential disasters that her son could possibly be in, and my thought was, I hope so. I think that could be really helpful for him. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist who was the protege of Freud, used to say somebody would come into his office and they just got a raise at work, a promotion at work, and got engaged, and everything was going well. And Jung would say to them, if we band together and really prop each other up, I think we can get through this. And then somebody would come and saying their relationship just broke up, or they lost their job, or they had some illness. And Jung would say, let's pop open a bottle of champagne and celebrate. This is wonderful. And he was trying to illustrate this idea. Freud said that if you want somebody to grow, set them up in a situation where they're going to fail at it. So it's a reframe, right? We have to not look with terror on mistakes. It's hard with our children because the children that end up in Vogue have done some really stupid and dangerous things. So it's hard, but that's our work. All right, next question. I'm working hard at containing every day. Sometimes I feel that it is forced, and I find myself feeling angry and resentful when I am working so hard and my child is not. This is one of the hardest things for me to do, and yet when I'm good at it, it is rewarding. Absolutely. You know that resentment too is evidence of poor self-care. So you've got to find ways, because containing is a gift that you give with nothing in return, right? Containing by its definition is I'm going to be there for you, and I need nothing back. I don't need you to like it, be grateful for it, appreciate it, see it, recognize it, thank me for it, or anything, right? That containing doesn't ask for anything back. But guess what I have to do then if I'm doing that? I have to get fed somewhere. I have to find some way to feel okay and well inside. So that happens as a therapist sometimes. You get drained. You're exhausted. Happens as a parent for sure. But that's where you go feed yourself somewhere. Find out how to feed yourself. Do selfish things. Do things that make you feel guilty, right? That's a good sign. Do something that makes you feel guilty. And what I mean by that is self-care, right? Be selfish. And then fight through the guilt that tells you ought not to be doing that. But be selfish somewhere else, not with your child. Any other questions? All right. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for moderating, Andrea. I hope these are helpful. And again, you can request the slides, or if you're on the parent portal. If you're not on the parent portal, we have a parent portal for parents who have already graduated, where you can have access to the webinars there and access to the slides there. I know this was a very sophisticated topic, so feel free to ask for those quotes and those slides, or to listen to it or watch it again. Hope it's helpful. I hope it's a helpful point of contact. Because of I'm going to New York next week, and then I'm going to vacation the following week. I wanted to get some webinars in around that, so I'm going to do a webinar at a different time. I'll send out the topic tomorrow, but it's going to be this Sunday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. So if sometimes these late times on the East Coast are tough for you, we'll try it this Sunday before I take off for my trip, and look forward to it. Have a great couple of days, folks, and I'll talk to you on Sunday. Take care. Bye-bye.